Last week, a doorway was open. And this happens every time the sun, or any planet for that matter, crosses into a new sign. And last week, the sun moved from Libra into Scorpio. And this is a zone of consideration where we all have that Scorpio part within us, but it's the potential of actually crossing that threshold into the zone of Scorpio is not an overtly inviting or invited kind of a set of experiences that many of us are willing to step across the threshold into. And this likely is because of the particular archetypes of the living experience that often are broached when in the land of Scorpio. Sex, death, and the occult. Oh, yeah. The willingness to cross there for, diving into the realm of sex. Oh, we're all overtly inclined to not hold back in that kind of an experience. The death factor, we might be a little bit more tenuous in our willingness to approach that particular subject matter. And yet, it's on the table. It's one of those topics that every one of us is going to have to consider along this physical life path that our soul is on. The occult. Oh, that conjures, and I think that's the right term, conjures up a lot of visionary versions of topic matters that are just more than a little edgy to, and particularly to those of us that have wandered into specific religious inclinations that have done their darndest to portray the occult in versions or definitions that do not easily exist in the realm of comfort. And yet, here we are in the time of Scorpio, where those matters are just a little closer to the surface of what is available for us to contemplate. Let's just look at the chart for right now. When I glanced at the chart for this week, one of the factors that I saw in play is that we've got 3 planets, Mercury, the Sun, and Venus, all doing their dance moves through Scorpio. And in a relatively short order, let's just zip through the week, watching, paying attention to these aspect lines that are in play here, right in the middle of this sign. I'm just basically Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If you might have noticed this triangular T square that has been forming as this week has unfolded. And you kind of see, here on Tuesday, it's the first inclinations of it forming, which is, enhanced by the fact that the moon, which we're still in the season of the eclipses, and that Scorpio eclipse, lunar eclipse, or solar eclipse that we had last week, brought up some considerations for what might be not just necessarily the most appropriate, because to some it may not appear as appropriate, but effective ways to handle. What is it that the sun, our vitality, might be beckoning our attention to pay attention to, in order that we might utilize to the best of our capacities what it is that is on the plate during this Scorpio season. 3 planets: the sun, our vitality; Venus, how we effectively engage with others. And because this is in the season of Scorpio, there's an ownership factor that is in play. Venus rules Taurus, personal ownership, but it's in Scorpio, which is the realm of shared ownership, that zone where how effective is something that sits there going to play into the zone of influence when more than one person is involved. One could say, who owns this? If we were to consider an indigenous perspective, ownership is of a very different nature there, because in that indigenous perspective, there is an awareness that we, as corporeal beings here on the physical plane, may not actually own anything. We're simply passing through this moment in time. Things show up, but do we really own them? Or might there be more of, tuning into this Scorpio perspective, a shared resonance of how something may be utilized on more than just a selfish or personal level? If in the consideration of what we opened up last week, of being able to most effectively be able to facilitate and a process whereby what we're being called upon to investigate in this realm of Scorpio, those mysterious sides of life. Yes, could it be the occult? Oh, absolutely. Could it be the sex? Indubitably. Why would we not want to include that? But dying and death? A little tenuous about sensing everybody jumping up and down with joy to wander into this realm of, a human version termination. Yeah, that's a kind of a shallow approach to what death really might signify. Yeah, you could say that it is a culmination of a particular cycle, but cycles happen, and the reason that they come to a close is so that another cycle can begin. That's all that death is, a cyclic transition into a space where something else is ready to be born. Now, Mercury, the other planet that has just recently wandered into Scorpio, it's a thought process. It's our perceptive capacities. It's how we fabricate the process of communication. And since it's in Scorpio, in the shared format, what is it exactly that we might be inspired to share one with another? This is where the edginess of Scorpio actually puts in an appearance that is not the most comfortable for all of us to embrace. And this is because the awareness factor of what actually is in play at multiple levels of intensity, of that interactive space between each of us, that what happens in the Scorpio realm is less inclined to exist only at a superficial level. These are inclinations to actually connect soul to soul with others. And I'm not just limiting this to other humans, or maybe even just other animals or other life forms on this planet, but actual energy beings that have and still exist around us. But we may or may not have been inclined to sense their presence. And when I'm talking about the thinning of veils that Scorpio represents, it is that opening into a level of mystery. Things that, skirt around the edges of our communication one with another. but rarely are given the depth of consideration that Scorpio is more willing to dive into. Think about from the sex thing, the intensity of intimacy that opens up between those involved. And just expand that a little bit further into, other considerations beyond just the physical, because sex isn't just physical, but the energy connections that potentially can open when we are in that proximal container where anything is possible. I don't know if you can feel that, but once you cross the threshold into this Scorpio realm, the potential for a level of connection to all energy beings is on the table. While some may be inclined to fear, and this is a good Scorpio term, fear the unknown. It's actually more than likely that there is a lot more transpiring in this realm of what we have termed as unknown, that while in Scorpio begs our attention. While the inclination might be to say, well, this is a personal process. Scorpio is not just a personal process. There's an intuitive nature to Scorpio that's, energizes. The level of connection, or those connective synapses that are attempting to awaken us to a process that is beckoning us to awaken ourselves to a much larger perspective of who we actually really are. And what is that version of living experience that we're partaking of? And are we wholeheartedly and completely in tune with what that might mean? Anyway, back to our aspect of this forming T-square here. The T-square that I'm aiming at is, the moon is bringing this into recognition right off the bat on Tuesday this week as it's approaching, because it moves 12 to 13 degrees a day, it's going to cross Saturn. Well, the Saturn-Uranus square, which has basically been in play for a long time, a very long time, is now moving toward an opposition to these three planets. Particularly the nodes are brought into there, and the nodes are part of the aspect consideration when doing the eclipses. But this forming square, I'm pay attention to exact aspects, but squares and oppositions, 90 degrees and 180 degrees, are aspects of tension and challenge, uh, because of elemental factors. Squares, the elemental factors are about signs that don't easily go out of their way to understand one another. And in this case, we have a water and an air. We have an air and an earth. Those are signatures that are less inclined to easily grasp what it is that something of that other kind of energy might be trying to portray for them. An air sign, mental, air, the imagination, the capacity to formulate things in space. There's a connection to computers and rapid information technologies and stuff. Scorpio, water sign, the capacity, all water signs, the capacity to feel. Well, the Scorpio feeling is the feeling of an intensity because of the potential connection that we hold one with another in a zone that supersedes, actually goes beyond just a physical level of connection. And Taurus, our capacity to tune into an awareness of ownership, personal ownership, and value. What is the value of things to me? This is Taurus. Scorpio is, what is the value that something might have to us in a shared perspective? But also Taurus is, how connected am I to the physical environment, to Mother Earth, to the natural elements of life? The Scorpio perspective, in opposition to that, says it understands that that level of connection is energetic and vibrational and functions at a level of potent intimacy that doesn't really require, actually that's not the right way, it doesn't find an inclination towards casualness. And the reason why is because of the sense of interconnected, energetic experiences that can transpire there. Anyway, this T-square that's happening, it's tension and it's challenge, as I've said before, across these fixed signs. And I think that perhaps a comment about the fixity might be relevant. Fixed signs of the zodiac, Leo is the fourth fixed sign, but the fixed signs, the tendency is to find something that works. And because it works, the inclination is I'm going to use that technique because it works effectively and consistently, or more consistently than some other techniques. And fixed signs get to a point where they're comfortable with not rocking the boat, sticking with the things that work and using them over and over again. Well, because we're in the season of Scorpio, it's highly likely questions will arise as to, is this the most effective utilization of my energy? Or perhaps might there be something that I'm missing? And since we're in Scorpio and the investigation of the mysteries is close to the surface, I need to ask questions. I need to query others, not necessarily just these physical others, other humans that we hang with, but query the energy matrix for answers as to, am I missing something? And the natural outworking of how we engage with one another from the Scorpio perspective really has that aim of diving deep, bringing to the surface factors that we may not be overtly inclined generally to consider because there's an edginess to them. There's a percolation of energies that seems like it's maybe just a little bit beyond the borders of what it is that we might be comfortable with. But Mars, the traditional ruler of Scorpio, is in Gemini. Gemini had just turned retrograde, by the way, over the weekend, is curious. And it's not just this kind of driving curiosity, which would normally be Mars in Gemini, but in retrograde, the consideration is to look a little deeper, a little more profoundly. And because we're talking about Scorpio season with Mars as its traditional ruler, don't be surprised if in the conversations that we have with one another, things come up that we hadn't expected that might incline us to not be overtly comfortable with. Yet if we stick with them, we're going to grow in ways that we can't predict. We're going to discover aspects of ourselves, probably that have always been there, that others may have been more than a little reticent to point us in the direction of. Anyway, this T-square is the main aspect that I was looking at for this week, because all week long, it's in vogue. It is the energy of the week, and it becomes stronger and stronger as the week passes. But always there, kind of playing in the background. So we've got this little water trine that's also forming, loosely as the week unfolds, but it's going to actually come more into play next week, more specifically, and also next week when we have the total lunar eclipse on Tuesday. So, one other aspect that happens on the 6th is the exact opposition of Venus down here to this Uranus, and so friggin' close, within a degree of this exact square to Saturn, that in our Sunday meditations, it's likely that we're going to be brought up against factors of exchange that we have with others that at one level are going to be challenging. That's that Saturn factor in play. But at another level, because of the Uranus factor down there, the idea is that things will be shaken up. But we have to gird up our loins, so to speak, in this kind of energy signature and be willing to actually broach topics with one another that we might not have been inclined to do before. There is a reason for this. It is Scorpio season. Those things that have been theoretically hidden away from us are percolating to the surface and begging our attention, because if we just let them fester in the background, they might develop in the form of illnesses within us. Whereas the true healing protocol of dynamic healing that Scorpio represents require us to step forward and willingly be reborn as new beings and allow the dross of what it is that has been holding us back to just pass away, so that the newness and the creativity of what it is that we came as souls on the planet at this time to embrace and grow might have the opportunity to do just that. And the requirement, because Venus is involved in doing the dance with others, and I mean any other being, whether it's part of the natural element or maybe beings from other dimensions that during the Scorpio season might appear closer to the surface than what we normally would be aware of. This image that I'm sitting in front of is not intended to spark fear within anybody of the hell realms. It could do that. But sometimes the requirement of stepping into the vibrational fire of creativity to burn away those things that are no longer useful to us is required. One thing to keep in mind here in Scorpio season is that your willingness to accomplish this will have every bit of a bearing on how effectively your rebirthing process will unfold. It's Scorpio. It's not just your journey. It is our journey. As soul beings, we incarnated in the current physical realm to accomplish very specific things. Each of us, in our own unique fashion, are on this soul quest, discovering who am I energetically, not just physically. How connected am I to this place that I am? And where actually is this place that I exist? Am I contained or curtailed within a narrow bandwidth of potential? Or do I see, sense the broader being that as a soul, I am, we are growing and encouraging one another to take chances, to be vulnerable. That's all I have for this week. We're still in Scorpio season. There is still magic afoot. Are you tuned into it? It's waiting for you to awaken to aspects of yourself that you may or may not have tuned into. Enjoy the journey, my friends.